Did your dog Wookie do anything special for Star Wars Day yesterday?
Um, he just basically sat here because he's 14, and he was like one of those characters in Star Wars that, let's say, merge with the Force.
Oh yeah, like Yoda. When 900 years old you reach, look as good you will not.
So he's kind of like the Yoda, old Yoda now.
Aw.
So, actually, my son, who's a huge Star Wars fan, and my wife and I, the three of us actually went to UMass because we had heard that there was sort of like in the dining halls, in one of the dining halls in particular, there's going to be a Star Wars themed sort of like, whatever. And so we did go there. And it was a little bit disappointing. We thought that it would be like, people dressed up and stuff like that. And it wasn't that, but only a Star Wars trivia was going on. And so we did go. It was good food, UMass dining,
Nice.
number one.
Have some green milk.
Number one.
Well, blue milk, I guess. Yeah.
It was good food. I actually had sushi.
Oh, good.
And that was great. So,
I watched Andor season 2 while I did the laundry. That's about all I did.
well, that's good enough. Yeah.
May the 4th observed. At the Amherst kitchen table of Hampshire College astronomer and mostly Star Trek fan as opposed to Star Wars fan, Dr. Salman Hameed, Mr. Universe.
Okay, no, I did like most of Star Wars as well. I'm not sort of like, in that dividing line.
I'm not either.
But I just think later on Star Wars became a little sort of like, more formulaic.
Yeah.
Whereas Star Trek, no great special effects, but it deals with more intellectual issues and things like that. So, and a hopeful future, which I think it's important to talk about right now because Gene Roddenberry's vision, and we have talked about it before, he really thought racial diversity was important, and he was putting it in the 1960s, a future where money is not important or it has been eliminated, and so you can spend time exploring space. That was important. So I actually think those kind of things. You see, you riled me up. We were going to talk about something else.
We're talking about it kind of in the same perspective, though, because we're talking about the funding for science and space exploration. I wore my NASA raincoat because it's a rainy day that I got at Wallops Island rocket testing facility, which is super cool. I went to visit Washington, D.C., and then we were going to Chincoteague Island to see where the ponies run wild. And all of a sudden there was a NASA facility there, which was so cool. Who knows how much longer that NASA facility will be funded because it's budget season.
And I am wearing an NEPM Fabulous 413 shirt.
Yes, we kind of traded wardrobes.
That's exactly right,
Yeah.
because funding for public media, NPR and PBS, that is already chopped or on the chopping block, let's put it this
by
way.
executive order, he's trying to pull that money. I'll also add, we're both big fans of the movies. You're on the board of Amherst Cinema. I have a friend who's a filmmaker that was working on several projects overseas. Executive order yesterday, Donald Trump saying if a movie is made overseas, 100% tariff.
And it's even unclear what does that even mean, because
Right.
there are so many different aspects of films that come in. But I think this is a good place to talk about NASA and NSF cuts, but I would actually go through films because Amherst Cinema, which is a non-profit, local, independent theater, we have a grant over there, and I'm saying we because I'm on the board of Amherst Cinema over there. So there is a small grant from the National Endowment of the Arts, which actually has a matching grant of about 20,000 to bring in young filmmakers that have made their first films. And it's called Bellwether series, and we've had filmmakers that sort of like, that were not known before, but those were the films, sort of like, that first films that come in. We highlight those, bring those filmmakers, then interact with audience and other types of things. But it looks like because of again, through executive order, the elimination of NEA grants, the National Endowment for the Arts, we may not be able to do that soon, like next year as well. So this is just a little bit of an example where we are seeing the impacts. We are already starting to see the impacts of these actions, and it is not about even a university or other aspects, but on a small level at sort of like your independent theater, which you may not be able to see things. And so this tariff aspect, the the recent one from just yesterday about the fact that that films that are not made in the U.S. are going to have 100% tariffs, whatever that means. It creates uncertainty, of course, with other stuff as well, but also small things like like an Emmer Cinema, the small independent theater, it gets impacted by it. And so yeah, SpaceX is going to be okay, but small businesses, small nonprofits, those will have an impact.
And so we're talking about the future of space exploration and what it looks like in the early stages of the federal budget for NASA.
Right. So I want to again differentiate between two things. One is that already some funding has been stopped, and that is so. For example, I mean, there's a lot of confusion about these things, but National Science Foundation, NSF, which funds a lot of astronomy research as well, just on April 30th, so this is the journal Nature, reported that an email had been sent out to say that to stop awarding all funding actions until further notice. And what it meant, it seems like, is like new research grants as well as supplying allotted funds for existing grants. So some grants that have been awarded funds, but they will be sent money incrementally every year. They've said, okay, well, those funds are not going to go there.
Yeah.
And no reason was given, right? I mean, so yeah, they're going to look at other things, but right now, just a couple of days ago, an email was sent to NSF that that this is not going to happen. And earlier, they had said that there is a new policy at NSF. There's a screening policy for topics or activities that may not be in alignment with agency priorities. And again, we can actually guess what that is. But so far, in the past couple of weeks, about 1,040 grants, over 1,000 grants, amounting to about $750 million of NSF, National Science Foundation, they have been terminated. And so this is an action, and the agency's director, by the way, resigned. And because he was actually not willing to go through with this, and so he resigned. And many of these things, we think about Doge and Donald Trump. But just to give you an idea, many of these grants were part of a list that was released by Senator Ted Cruz. So there are multiple people, they've had their eyes on these type of things, and they are getting sort of like their way in these things. So these grants, the way they were highlighted, were by Ted Cruz, and they've been cut. So this is National Science Foundation. Already over 1,000 grants have been stopped.
What kind of things was National Science Foundation doing in the world of astronomy that could have possibly been controversial to Doge, even if they're trying to incorporate DEI into things like that? The stars, I mean, maybe they don't let them look at dark matter, but they'll let them look at all the white dwarfs that are out there or something. But I can't think of what could be controversial about looking to the stars that would make them want to cut them. I can see why you would want to assess whether it's worthwhile, but, this drastic chainsaw method it just causes so much uncertainty.
Right, and again, a lot of the times with National Science Foundation, is not just astronomy, but it also has all kinds of research. It could be working on, for example, NIH is more in terms of diseases, but NSF is looking at various kind of impacts. Climate, for example, is in there. And so astronomy shows up, I think, again, the way it has been phrased, perhaps diversity aspects that come in. There are efforts to encourage diversity in there, but it is little bit more has been spelt out, for example, in the president's budget. And so to differentiate what I just mentioned about the NSF budget that has already been, those grants have been canceled, but a new budget has been proposed. Now, this budget has not been passed yet. This is the White House budget, and they are suggesting about 56% cut to the National Science Foundation. And within the NASA, there is a cut. And overall cut is around about 25%. But most of the cut within the 25% is actually goes to the space science division. So meaning to say the division that funds, for example, astronomy, James Webb Space Telescope, Hubble Space Telescope, all these other missions that you know of. And in fact, majority of astronomy funding comes from NASA missions. NSF is the second biggest pile for astronomers. And astronomy is not business, right? So if you are at a university, you are being funded by NASA and NSF. This is where astronomy money comes from. And all this great cutting edge science that you think about, it comes from this funding. And of course, it supports graduate students when they are working on their thesis work. It actually funds postdoctoral research. And again, that has been the support for postdoctoral researchers has also been cut, and in fact, that is from both NASA and NSF. But why do we need that kind of support? Well, if you are working as a graduate student, how are you going to fund yourself in there, especially during summer months? So summer is great time for graduate students to work on their research projects because they are not, for example, doing TA work like teaching assistants, which supports them. So if you come over here, I mean, I think this is one of the best things about the US. When I went to graduate school, I didn't have to pay extra because I was paying my tuition and sort of like getting stipend for being a teaching assistant. Mm-hmm. But that works during the semester. So the 2 semesters that you are, and so you are taking your classes, you are taking your exams, you are doing all of those things, and you are doing research, and you are a teaching assistant for introductory astronomy classes or other classes in undergraduate. But then the summer comes. So in theory, then you would be you would not be able to support yourself, and you would have to work at fast food or other places in order to support yourself. But research time is crucial, and summer is the time when you're not taking your classes, when you are not doing your TA work. So summers are actually crucial for graduate students to work on their research, and that's where you catch up on, where you can actually spend all of your time thinking about your research project. But you need funding. So oftentimes the funding comes from NASA and NSF grants, especially NASA grants. So if you get a time, for example, which is extremely competitive on James Webb Space Telescope, your time comes with some money attached to it because NASA gives you money to analyze the data. Mm-hmm. And of course, when you analyze the data and publish it, who gets the publicity? NASA. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, this is actually a great system which the US has, both from the National Science Foundation and from NASA perspective as well, that they actually give money to the universities to do the research, which actually benefits those agencies themselves. Mm-hmm. And so this was, rather than having a centralized government system, which actually does research and creates their own institutions just to do research. Here, you can give money to universities, and they are doing the work for you. And then, so that's what's going to get lost. It's unclear what's going to happen to those graduate students, not to mention if you have foreign students, for example, they will have a hard time finding work outside because they don't qualify for work. But if you are on these grants, then you can actually be on it because it satisfies their status as a student here. So this is a really crucial thing that this comes in. So more than half, or close to more than half of NSF budget is going to be cut if president's budget passes. And this if is a big deal because it is a proposed budget. In President Trump's first term, also there was a budget that had draconian cuts to NSF and NASA, but the Congress did not buy in. This time it may be different. And so I just want to again mention that almost half of NASA's science budget, this is what funds astronomy, for example, is on the chopping block.
What are we going to talk about if nobody's doing any astronomy anymore? And I can see from a strictly commercial standpoint, hard to sell astronomy knowledge in the marketplace. But if we're going back to where we began with a Gene Roddenberry sense of trying to find the deepest meanings about who we are as human beings and where we fit in the grandness of the cosmos, this is how we do it.
Right. So there is an irony in there, actually, somewhere, because in the 1970s, NASA had a lot of funds, a lot more funding. And actually, at the time, NASA didn't care that much about public opinion. And of course, I got into astronomy. We have talked many times about it before by watching Carl Sagan's Cosmos,
which I believe was a PBS funded.
It was PBS, and it was the, I think it's still the highest, most watched PBS science program ever, in all over the world. And of course, it changed lives of people all over the world, including mine. But the reason why Carl Sagan decided to make Cosmos was because in the 1970s, 1977, 76, 77, there were two spacecrafts, Viking 1 and Viking 2, that landed on Mars. And people didn't care. It wasn't in the public media as much. And NASA, in fact, initially didn't even want to put a camera on Viking 1 and 2. I mean, now you think, okay, hey, all these cool Mars images actually, and others also, you associate them with NASA. But NASA was like, yeah, but we are just interested in sort of like, data, science, and things like that. Who cares a camera? And Carl Sagan had to argue, first of all, when they were putting that mission up, like, it's like, hey, you're looking for life, you have all these experiments, but like, have a camera. Maybe you're going to see a Martian polar bear walking. Well, here would be your answer, right? So partly it was in jest, but partly it was that, no, you should have pictures over there. But then people's imagination was not captured by Viking 1 and 2, and Carl Sagan was like, this is crazy. Look, this is an amazing thing that we are doing, and we are doing it with taxpayer money. Taxpayers should know what is being done, and so they should be rewarded for that. And that was his motivation for bringing the universe in the form of Cosmos, the TV show, which again was a dramatic success. But then in the early 1990s, the NASA funding did start to dry up a bit, and there was a concerted effort that, well, you should tell people, the public, what you are doing and why it is important. And especially for a field like astronomy, which, as you said, well, you don't see an immediate benefit from it, and so you have to make a case for you. And when Hubble Space Telescope was launched, it actually did create an office of public engagement from that perspective. It is the Space Telescope Science Institute, but it also had a separate wing that made sure that it communicates those results to the public. And that has been of immense success, and that is the reason why you see, first of all, these beautiful pictures that come out from there, like the Pillars of Creation, one of the earlier pictures, or the Hubble Deep Field. But it also makes an effort to communicate what those pictures mean, not just for astronomy, but for the larger public and for humanity, for example. And that has been a very successful thing, to a degree that at one point in the early 2000s, when it was thought that maybe we can just bring back Hubble, or do not send repair mission to it, there was a public pressure on the Congress that said, no, we must save Hubble Space Telescope, and it is still working. So, and now, of course, we have James Webb Space Telescope as well, and you can actually go through a slew of telescopes both in space and on the ground that are supported by NASA and also by the National Science Foundation, and there are a lot of telescopes that are in line to go up. But these kind of cuts, they are going to, first of all, take US out of any future contributions, significant contributions to astronomy, because sure, maybe one or two missions may still go, which are in the near term, but the way the budget is structured, your science part, your future missions are just not going to happen.
And then it goes back to being NASA as strictly an element of a Cold War race for space and land on other bodies like the moon and maybe Mars.
So the New York Times had a story about this budget, and they actually called it that it is becoming sort of like, if the budget passes as is, it would become sort of like the National Moon and Mars Administration, because it will be just focused on human space exploration. And who does it benefit? Elon Musk. Because the program actually also talks about the Space Launch System, that it's going to get discontinued after Artemis 3. So they're not discontinuing it immediately. This is the mission to the moon, and a competitor to SpaceX is also granted this stuff, so that will get canceled after that. There is a Lunar Space Station program, so in orbit around the moon. That is expected to get canceled after that. So a lot of focus is going to go to Mars. Who can launch, or the goals of launching a mission to Mars is SpaceX. So basically, what Musk wants to do is going to get funded potentially by NASA. And at what expense? At the expense, for example, of these science programs. So there is this larger context to that. But I want to read one thing. And that is, so there are many different areas of science that is being cut from in NASA and NSF. But there's a request to completely defund NASA's Office of STEM Engagement. So STEM is science, technology, and engineering and math, and it's about $143 million. Okay, so it does impact universities because they actually fund these things, and the goal is to bring sort of like the larger diverse workforce and to build American workforce for these type of fields. So this is for that, and this is how the justification has been given in the budget proposal that has been proposed by the White House. They says NASA's primary role is space exploration, and similar to prior generations that were inspired by the Apollo lunar landings, NASA will inspire the next generation of explorers through exciting, ambitious space missions, not through subsidizing woke STEM programming and research that prioritizes some groups of students over others and have had minimal impact on aerospace workforce. So they think that the only way that you can actually do that, or should be what the US should be doing that, what NASA should be doing that, is going to be through these space missions, which are also going to be funded primarily through private companies, most likely, who actually don't care about the broader population. They actually care about the shareholders, and they're not going to make an effort to bring in STEM sort of like from diverse backgrounds, and also and it's not just diverse in terms of racial diversity, it's also socioeconomic diversity. But they think, oh, we don't need to build that up, we can just launch these missions, and of course they're going to be successful because we haven't made any other cuts, right? So you can actually see how it's going to impact, not to mention that other cuts are in climate, in clean energy, in behavioral and economic sciences, and other areas that are also funded by NASA to understand what's happening to our planet. And we learn a lot of it by studying other planets as well. But any place you have climate science, that is also going away. So again, this is a White House budget. A lot of changes have already happened through executive order, through DOGE. But this budget, if it passes, it is pretty clear it is going to be a death knell for astronomy or cutting edge astronomy in the US in the coming years. It's not going to happen today, it's not going to happen tomorrow, but 10 years down the road, when you cannot fund new observatories, you cannot fund new space missions for science, you are not going to get graduate students over here to work because they won't see this is the place where cutting edge astronomy is happening. They are going to go to other places. So when you talk about where are you going to get that STEM force, it's not going to be from here. It's going to be elsewhere. It's not going to be the US. It's going to be somewhere else. And so American Astronomical Society, I actually really like what they are doing this week, starting Monday, today. They are asking its members to actually take out some time from teaching, from grading, from research, from whatever you are doing, to actually every day do a little bit. For example, write to members of Congress. It's day 1. Day 2, call your members of Congress. Request a meeting with your congressional office. Host an advocacy event at your department, at your campus. And then also have local journal club where usually they discuss research. Have a journal club and talk about how astronomy is funded, how this budget gets created, and what they can do. And I think it's not just for astronomers to actually do this, because again, if you have ever wondered about the universe, if you've ever said, hey, this result from James Webb Space Telescope that really pushes our knowledge about, for example, how first galaxies in the universe formed, that's really cool stuff. We are talking about something 13 billion years ago, and we are trying to figure out earliest galaxies in the universe. Well, if you care about that, if you care about, well, hey, we've been able to find gases in the atmospheres of an exoplanet, they may or may not show some interesting signatures that eventually we may have signatures of life. if you think that is important, or of Mars, that okay, well, there is water over there, maybe there may one day be, we may find interesting signatures over there, or atmosphere of Venus. If you get any of those things, if your answer has ever been, this is actually really cool, it gets me away from my day to day questions, well, this budget is going to take that away. So take out time, a few minutes of your time, just write to your congressman and say, you care about the NASA budget, you care about the NSF funding. This is the time to look forward. This is an exciting time because we can try to find answers to many of the fundamental questions of humanity. Let's not take that away from the domain of the US.
And while you're writing to them, you may want to consider the places where you can most easily access some of this information as a non-astronomer. Perhaps it was Cosmos, or maybe it's the WGBH program NOVA. That's in jeopardy too.
I think you should add PBS and NPR definitely alongside with that. I mean, and I'm not saying it because we are talking about it here, but I'm also saying it because that's where, I mean, again, as I said, my life got changed because of Cosmos, which aired on PBS, right? And I'm not the only one, because it's almost a boring thing, because you ask anybody around my generation to say, hey, how did you get in astronomy? And you don't even have to guess. You go like, yeah, Sagan. You know, so it is impactful, and we get information, again, not just about astronomy, but also from other things as well through NPR and PBS, and for local programming through Fabulous 413.
Shameless plug.
Absolutely, but it's because of shameful cuts. So shameless plug is totally fine in this regard.